morning. Okay. Thank you very much for coming on time. And we are late by 12, 13 minutes, but I think we'll catch up on that because we're going to cancel the first tea break. You've had a long break in the morning already. Good morning once again. We have with us a very, very important person who does a great deal of work as far as keeping corruption at bay in this country is concerned. Mr. Pradeep Kumar, the Central Vigilance Commissioner, the Central Vigilance Commissioner of the also. After a distinguished and varied career as a civil servant spanning about 4 decades, Mr. Pradeep Kumar assumed the responsibility of CVC in July 2011. He's a graduate in electrical engineering from IIT Delhi and Masters in Economics and Social Studies from University of Wales, UK. He joined the service in 1972 and served at various execution and policy-making levels in the state government of Haryana and government of India. In Government of India, he has worked as Chairman, National Highway Authorities, and as head of 3 important departments, Secretary, Disinvestment, Secretary, Defense Protection, and Defense Secretary. He has rich experience of heading some of the most important sectors as Principal Secretary of Power, Irrigation, Science and Technology, Town and Country Planning and Urban Development Departments in the Government of Haryana. He has also worked as Joint Secretary in the Department of Heavy Industries and as Additional Secretary in the Ministry of Coal in the Government of India. He has served on boards of several leading companies like BHEL, Maruti Udyog, Andrew Yule, Hindustan Paper Corporation, Coal India, and Neyveli Lignite Corporation. Friends, I must tell you how much it's a privilege to actually hear him talk, be in his company, because he plays a very crucial role in India. And the title, India, the Future is Now, unless each one of you hear from him and exchange your views with him, he's not going to understand what is going on. I had 5-minute interaction with him in the meeting room downstairs, and I've explained to him the diversity that we bring to this room here, that we are spread across 32 different chapters. We have, as you can see, we are not exactly a bunch of entrepreneurs. We are a bunch of entrepreneurs, we are a bunch of individuals, we are a bunch of women, we have all kinds of people in this organization. Sir, we'd like to hear from you, but we'll keep this format very open. He's going to speak for about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll spend the rest of the time in interacting with each one of you.
Thank you, Mr. Shrikant Suryanarayana, Chairman, Young Indians. I am really delighted to be here today. In fact, when I had accepted this invitation, I had thought that I will be meeting a bunch of business professionals because of the affiliation with CII. But when I was talking with your chairman today in the morning before the start of this session, he said that it is much more than this, and you have lawyers, you have advocates, you have people from diverse fields. And therefore, the task is, they are all in the business of nation building, and it is not only business professionals. So I am really delighted to be here to get an opportunity to meet all of you. India is a young country. In fact, 50% of our people are less than 25 years old, and the youth is increasingly driving the social and political discourse of this country. In fact, it is the energy of the youth which is bringing about change, and therefore I think the theme of this conference, India, the Future is Now, is very appropriate. And I was, while coming here, I was also reading the template that you have said, we can, we will, and there can be nothing better than this, I would say. We are also meeting, as you know, at a very interesting point of time. An important election is round the corner, and in this election, good governance and corruption is dominating the discourse. There is people are actually fed up with corruption. there is a growing demand from the grassroots that we must have good governance. And it is widely acknowledged that corruption is one of the major reasons for poor governance. And there is a renowned focus on fighting corruption in the country, and our polity is responding to this new reality. All of you are aware of the ill effects of corruption. Corruption has a detrimental effect on our developmental efforts. It distorts our priorities and our decision-making. The funds which are meant for the poor do not reach the poor. There is leakage of funds. In fact, you would have read, some of you would have read in the newspapers that in UP, nearly 10,000 crores of money, which was meant for National Rural Health Program, that got diverted. So this is the kind of negative effect that is there. When we are selecting projects, then we do not see what is good in public interest, but we start asking questions like, what do I get out of this? What is in it for me? So public interest is subsumed by private greed, and this is definitely a problem of corruption. The other problem is that when there is a leakage of funds and siphoning of funds, then the money is not utilized properly. Suppose we have to build 100 schools, and if 20% money is diverted, then we will not be able to build 100 schools. We will be able to build only 80 schools. If we are building roads, and the roads, the quality, the standards are poor, then really we are harming ourselves. So in that sense, the effect of corruption is all pervasive, and it has a negative effect on our governance and on what we want to achieve for this country. The other negative effect of corruption which I want to point out to you is for business. In business also, when you want to have a contract or something, then if you pay bribe or take bribe, you distort competition. And when you distort competition and do not provide a level playing field, then the competition itself is getting compromised, which is basic to running the markets efficiently. Also, the other negative effect of corruption is that it undermines our institutions. The rule of law is undermined. Say you go to a thana, the policeman does not register your FIR. You go to a court, you do not get delivery of justice because of corruption. So the effects of corruption are very, very negative for our developmental efforts and for our governance. According to the World Economic Forum, for doing business in India, the second most important problematic factor is corruption. The first is infrastructure, lack of infrastructure, in fact. So lack of infrastructure is the most problematic factor, and the other is the corruption. India is ranked, Transparency International brings out a corruption perception index every year. And there India is ranked 94 out of 177 countries. What it means is that 93 countries are more honest than India. In real terms, what it also means is that while we are doing better than Pakistan and Nepal and Bangladesh, but that should be small consolation, because even 8 countries from Africa are perceived to be more honest than India. The countries like Ghana, Namibia, Gambia, they all are perceived to be more honest than India. So corruption in India is not a new phenomenon. That is another thing that I want to tell you. It has always been there from ancient times. In fact, Kautilya in Arthashastra writes about it, and I will quote something from him. It is interesting. He wrote several thousand years back that just as it is not possible to know when the fish moving in the water drinks water, similarly, it is not possible to know when the fish moving in the water drinks water. Similarly, it is difficult to find out when the officers employed in execution of works misappropriate money. The corruption of Patwari and Daroga is part of our folklore and is well documented. Petty corruption has always been there. We have been accepting it as a way of life. We call it as Dasturi. We call it by different names. But what is interesting is, and what has changed is, that now our tolerance for corruption is no longer there. We are no longer prepared to accept the business as usual. And this is definitely a good and a welcome development, that we are now no longer to accept the old ways. There are two forms of corruption. Corruption broadly takes two forms: petty corruption and grand corruption. Petty corruption is the corruption when you go to an office and you want, say, a birth certificate, a driving certificate. So it is coercive in nature. You are entitled to that service, but that it is normally at the lower levels of bureaucracy. It is extortionist in nature. You go there and somebody says that, look, if you want it in a particular time, then you have to pay me some money. Or it would take this nature that if you do not pay me the money, then I will put an objection. And then you just don't have the patience to go into the office and keep trying to solve that out. So this is one level of corruption which is very much there, which is called the petty corruption, and it affects the large sections of our society. Anybody who has gone to a government office would have come across it. We try to justify it by calling it as facilitation payment or whatever we may call it, but for services to which we are entitled, we have to pay bribes. And in fact, a study was carried out, and it says that 51% of the bribes in our country are for services to which we are entitled. The thing is that in Western democracies, there is grand corruption. But what is good about mature democracies is that to a large extent, this kind of across-the-counter corruption has been overcome. So this affects the people the most. The common person is affected the most by it. And in Western democracies, and to some extent now in East Asia, etc., also this has been stopped. But we are still struggling to control this kind of a petty corruption. The other is, of course, the grand corruption, where undue favors are enjoyed by business entities, and this is and by higher levels of bureaucracy and political executive. This is collusive in nature, and it is mainly there when we allocate natural resources, we give licenses, and there are different examples of it. To give you an idea of this kind of collusive corruption, I'll give you some examples, like award of contracts through public works. This is one area where grand corruption takes place. One of the most talked about example is the CWG contracts. Then procurement of goods and services, where you try to do it. In fact, 25% of our GDP is used in procurement of goods and service by the state governments, the central government, and the various public sector entities. And this is one area in which there is a great scope of corruption. One of the recent examples is where you have been reading about the Augusta Westland Choppers deal, where there is corruption. Then in recruitment of employees, this is another area which one is not talked about. And another example of this is that one chief minister, former chief minister of Haryana, is behind bars on a JBT employment case. Then, of course, you all would be aware of evasion of taxes, where the income tax officers or the customs officers, in partnership with the entities, with the business entities, ensure that tax is not paid properly. Then in quality of projects, in adulteration of foods and drugs, I can give you numerous examples of grand corruption. Of course, the most notable which are being talked about are the 2G spectrum, the coal block allocation, and contracts in Commonwealth Games. This corruption is actually, when it reaches an extreme form in some countries, this collusive corruption, then it is called state capture, where the formulation of government policies are dictated by private interests and not by public interest. Why does corruption occur? number of studies have been done. Santhanam study was done way back in 1964. And some of the reasons for this one is that it is due to misuse of discretion enjoyed by public authorities. Then we have cumbersome, non-transparent, and ambiguous procedures. There is excessive state control and regulation, and lack of citizen-oriented approach by the officials. All this aggravates the problem. So we in the Central Vigilance Commission have been advocating simplification of rules and a more transparent and accountable governance system. Discretion should be reduced to the bare minimum and only where absolutely necessary. We should encourage free and fair competition. One of the major things that had happened in 1991 was that we liberalized our economy, and therefore some forms of corruption which were associated with licensed Raj simply disappeared. Of course, new opportunities of corruption came, but one form of corruption was totally eliminated. We have always believed that technology, firstly, wherever we can reduce the human interface, we should try to reduce the human interface and try to have e-governance or leverage technology so that we can eliminate corruption. All of you, when I was in college 40 years back, then if one would go to a train station to buy a ticket for Chennai, say, for example, then one would stand in a queue for 2 hours, and then when you reach the counter, he would simply close it, and he would say that you come again to buy the ticket. So that used to be the system at that time, and then there were touts who would say that you pay 30 rupees or 20 rupees, you can get the ticket. But now the computerized reservation in railways, in air ticketing, etc., has eliminated that kind of corruption. The other kind of corruption used to be in getting a phone. All of those of my generation know how difficult it was to get an OYT phone. And now everybody has got a phone, and it is not something that is talked about. So those some kinds of corruption have totally been eliminated. So we have always been advocating that we must leverage technology. Some of the new initiatives, like paying of taxes. Earlier, now income tax allows paying of taxes by online payment. There are downloading of forms have become very easy. In Delhi, the unit system, value system has been introduced so that house tax can be paid and the consultant can do it. Self-certification can be done. So all these things help in reducing corruption wherever we can leverage technology. Aadhaar is also a very good program, and if we can link it with the public delivery system of the various benefits that are there, then it will also be a game changer. We also, in the Central Vigilance Commission, try to have transparent policies, which I said about simplification of procedures. Like in procurement, etc., at least in the central government, now a public procurement bill is about to be brought about. It is before the parliament, and hopefully when the new parliament is formed, then it would be possible to get it passed. But the guidelines are already there. So we work with different departments and say that please, for God's sake, simplify the procedures and make the life of the citizen easy. One side is the public servant who is taking the money. This is called the demand side of corruption. But the other is the supply side of corruption. And it is here that we must also address the supply side of corruption. It is increasingly recognized that we must have effective corporate governance measures, and we must have corporate ethics. In fact, CII itself was a pioneer in introducing a corporate code of ethics for its members. So in that sense, in supply of corruption, it is increasingly realized that we must have more transparent financial disclosures and accounting norms so as to make it difficult for companies to conceal payments and kickbacks. The New Companies Act is a very big step forward in that direction. The UK Bribery Act, if many of you know, and the FCPA Act in USA are some of the landmark legislations which insist that the corporates must create an environment where paying bribes will be punished by the corporates themselves. And if they offer bribes, not only the bribe payer, but the company itself can be hauled up. There are measures. It is coupled with system of blacklisting and debarring of companies found guilty of indulging in unethical practices. The World Economic Forum has estimated the cost of corruption, is around 10% of the total cost of business is due to corruption. It is also, we also realize in the Central Vigilance Commission that corruption cannot be tackled without bringing about reforms in governance. While action can be taken at the corporate level, but this is not enough. For purity in public life, it is important that criminalization of politics is stopped, because politics in some sense is the fountainhead of corruption. So we have been advocating along with the Election Commission of bringing about electoral reforms. Some of the recent orders of the Supreme Court are very welcome in this regard. One is that in the Parliament, if somebody gets convicted for an offense which entails a punishment of more than 2-3 years, then he will be automatically disqualified. And the other thing is, and in another judgment recently, the Supreme Court has held that the cases of MPs and MLAs will need to be decided within a year. So both together will help in decriminalizing our parliament, which is, I think, a major step forward. But one of the major problems that we are facing is the delay in courts, in the sense that you would have seen some high-profile cases which you all know that Mr. Lalu Yadav's case took 17 years to decide, or there are other important cases which take very long time to decide. So judicial delays is also a very big problem, and we have been having interaction with the Law Ministry to see how they can be cut down. In fact, we had ourselves in the Central Vigilance Commission carried out a study. Currently, 6,500 cases of Prevention of Corruption Act are in various trial courts, special courts of CBI, etc., where 1,500 cases are more than 10 years old, and nearly 50% are 5 years old. So one of the cardinal principles of criminal justice is that the guilty should be punished swiftly and the honest should be exonerated. But if we have such long trials, then the faith in the system goes down. We have some of the measures that have taken place in the recent past. In this, we always value the Right to Information Act, which is a very important act and which has helped the citizens to get information to fight corruption. So it is one of the most powerful ones. And after a long battle of 40 years, now the Lokpal has enacted. Once the Lokpal is constituted, then we are optimistic that it will help in tackling corruption in high places. The Whistleblowers Bill has also been passed recently in the Parliament. And some of the bills which are waiting the approval of the Parliament, which you would have been reading in press, would help in creating a strong framework for fighting corruption. These bills are, one is the Public Services Delivery Bill, the Judicial Standards and Accountability Bill, Public Procurement Bill, and Amendment to Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. That again is a very important amendment, because for the first time in India, in line with the best international practice, we will bring bribe giver and bribe taker on a similar and an equal footing. So this will change the entire paradigm in which we deal with corruption in this country, and this bill is also expected to be passed once this is there. India has also taken the major step of signing the United Nations Convention Against Corruption in May 2012, which has its own implications in adopting the best benchmark practices. So in a sense, we are creating this framework for fighting corruption, and this has all been possible because of the active citizen participation, as I said earlier, this is only because of active media, vibrant democracy, civil activism, that these kind of changes are being brought about. But before I close, I want to make one or two more points. One is that studies show that laws are never enough for fighting corruption. China is one country which has the most strict laws for fighting corruption. In fact, I was talking to my counterpart there, nearly 40,000 people are sent to jail every year on corruption charges in China, and the sentences are very strict. It could be life imprisonment also. But despite that, according to Transparency International, it ranks 80th in Corruption Perception Index and is one of the, and is globally acknowledged as one of the very corrupt places. So law enforcement by itself is not enough. In fact, Plato had once said, I will quote it because I found it interesting, good people do not need laws to tell them to act responsibly, while bad people will find a way around the laws, unquote. So that is the reality, and therefore corrupt behavior is rooted in our venal self-interest and in greed. So ultimately, at some level, we have to create an ethical values. And therefore, it is very important that the school and family play a very important role in shaping our values. And in fact, we have worked with the Central Board of Secondary Education to have a curriculum in the schools of value education right from nursery to higher secondary level. So basically, I think that we as a society, the parents have to play a great role, the mothers have to play a great role, the family, the teachers, etc., to inculcate right values. And we must try to, Gandhiji had said that as human beings, our greatness lies not so much in being able to remake the world as in being able to remake ourselves. So that is what we should try. So apart from the values, the last point that I want to say is about the human element. Whenever we talk of corruption, whatever we may say, it is the human element and the leadership that counts. Yatha Raja Tatha Praja. And many of you who are well educated, you are bright, dynamic, and all of you, because you are young, not like me. So in that sense, you would be comfortable with the spreadsheets, with the soft power and the IQ, the domain knowledge and the EQ, etc. But what we say is that all this is important, but if you do not have moral moorings, you will be lost. The moral compass is there. Globally, it is required that if you want to be on this long journey, then you must, and on this arduous journey, then you must have a moral anchor. And the moral quotient is very important. So I would say that as you are going to be, you are already leaders, many of you will be leaders in future, you must keep this in mind, that it is your leadership and the change that you want to bring about that you should see in yourself. So with these few words, I think I am delighted to be here again and to have an opportunity to interact with you. Thank you.
We'll open up the floor for questions. We have about 10 minutes with us. Please.
Very good morning, sir. This is Uday representing Hyderabad chapter. Your reference to Kautilya and Arthashastra, taking up from there. Kautilya was an advisor during the Nanda's time when the dynasty was extremely corrupt. When he clearly stated that corruption and political way of being are inseparable, he also very clearly distinguished the evils of corruption on society, on family, as well as the kingdom, and the clear dangers of what all is for all these things available. And from then on, your fundamentals or framework of fighting corruption Now, when you say laws are not enough, so as CVC, do you have a very clearly defined framework which is beyond political interest and beyond the vested interest of the corporates as well as the political interest for you to be effective, for you to frame laws which will really percolate down to the common citizen, protect his hard-earned tax money, and as well as, I remember as a kid we used to have moral science as a subject, of which drove the ethical values right down to in our veins, and which is absolutely vanished. So do we have a framework where, you know, you drive down the moral values also down the veins of very susceptible young minds, so that all these you know, loopholes and all these blocks are effectively blocked? And on the final note, I would like to, you know, bring to your notice that your predecessor Ranjana Kumar comes from a family. She is my aunt, so I've had a lot of discussions and interactions with her on these subjects also. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think I could not agree with you more, okay, that we need to have some kind of a value education. And as I was mentioning to you, we have worked with the Central Board of Secondary Education, which runs a large number of schools, to develop a curriculum, a framework, where value education is made a regular part of the teaching curriculum. In fact, they have included in the curriculum, it has got, at the lower level, they teach through stories, through case studies. Then there are examples that they pick up a particular day, say on Mahatma Gandhi's birthday, they will talk about Mahatma Gandhi. Abraham Lincoln's birthday, they may talk about something that is connected with Abraham Lincoln. Different stories, but it is basically secular in character. And the idea is that family, as I said, and the school definitely play a defining influence. So we do try to work with them, but we do not make laws. The laws are made by Parliament. This is something that I wanted to clarify.
Good morning, sir. So my question to you is, what is the cost that these businesses who are coming to our country in different industries like telecom, like power, what is the cost that these particular businesses will have to pay for an indecisiveness of the government at a particular level, at a particular certain time, let's say 10 years back? When those kind of decisions get reversed after a particular set of business, whether in the telecom industry or in the power sector, has invested tons of money, whether from India or from abroad, and it has employed thousands of youths and thousands of people within their own system. And one fine day, because of the politics of the country changing, some vested interest coming in equation, I'm not justifying to whatever was done right, but it was the cost of doing business in our country and we have to accept it. We had to check it at the right point in time. The delay in checking it is actually causing a lot of damage to the youth, to the employable youth, and also to the society in general, where our industry is losing a face.
I think firstly, an honest government need not be a paralyzed government. This formulation itself is a wrong formulation. In fact, if everybody follows the rule, then the things will move much faster. The problem comes when, for various vested interests, we try to bypass what are accepted rules of doing things. The second thing is, you said about, if the things are being done with the right intentions, there is no problem. But the argument that so many people would be losing, etc., I will answer it obliquely. In the sense, in America, which is considered the home of capitalism and is supposed to be very good, when one chartered accountant firm was found to be doing something wrong, its business stopped globally. Another power energy firm, when it indulged in malpractice, it was employing thousands of people, but they did not hesitate to close the business of that thing. So if you do wrong thing, then you are to be held accountable. In fact, I was hearing a seminar and where it was said that the regulatory forbearance in this country is enormous. We live with a lot of kind of wrong things, which in other countries would just not be possible.
Aditi's got a question there. Then I'll come to Shaurya and...
Good morning, sir. Sir, I have basically two questions. One is that the reason of corruption is greed. Greed from both the parties. Whether you blame the bureaucrats or whether you blame the businessmen, whoever. These are the two guilty parties that are charged all the times. In fact, both have nothing to do with it. Unfortunately, because the decision is taken by the politician. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, because what I have closely seen is that decision is already taken at the higher authorities. Other people are executing it and some part of them are party to it. And everybody just blames bureaucracy blindly without understanding that they possibly cannot change policies. They cannot take decisions. Their hands are tied. I come from a government background, can safely talk on this subject. And the other thing on the corruption was that transparency is paramount. If we cannot have transparency in the country, it would never go away. And to expedite only, we give corruption. But nothing happens. Actually, what he was just trying to say, that somebody else will come, the government will change, interest will change. Again, we'll go back to square one. So if you really want to do away with corruption, and morals alone will not do it, the moral science classes only will not do it, we'll have to start celebrating the whistleblowers and not give them protection. The whistleblower will be outcast immediately if somebody wants to raise his voice on corruption within the department also, from vigilance, I can safely say. He'll be getting the vigilance posting for probably next 20 years in his career if he is a strict vigilance officer. So, I mean, within the system also, they don't allow somebody to speak. Outside the system, if somebody speaks, you provide them protection. But you don't want to celebrate that somebody has come forward and is talking about corruption. Please help him to stop it. The system does not help the person who's helping the system to stop it. So what's your take on that?
No, I agree that it is human greed that drives corruption. But I think it would be an oversimplification to say that only politicians are involved and the corporates and the bureaucrats are not involved. It is an excess. And there are, when we study the cases, it is not like this, that it is only the politicians who is driving. It is the wrong advice by the bureaucrat. Many a times they are complicit. And it is the corporates also who in partnership with political executive and the bureaucratic leadership try to tweak the government rules and regulations to their advantage. So I do not buy this argument that only the politicians are responsible. The other thing is that we must create a system, must create an environment in which the honest can work freely and the corrupt have no place to hide. This is what everybody tries to do, to have a mix of incentives and disincentives. But there is no magic wand to remove corruption. Even in societies like Europe, etc., corruption is still there. But a more fair and equitable society, better laws, etc., definitely help in reducing the scope of corruption. But everybody has his own take on corruption, so that is how it is.
Shaurya, Guru, and then we are running out of time, so Shaurya, keep it quick. Yeah.
Sir, thank you, sir. So lots to ask you, but sir, very quickly. So one is this Lokpal, which has been enacted right now. Certain parties are calling it the Jokpal, and it's been sort of questioned for its weakness. So what's your take on that, whether is it a good law or not? And secondly, sir, we've currently heard this controversy about the Supreme Court referring to the CBI as a caged parrot. So do you think the CVC, for that matter, or the office of the CVC, has been given the requisite power and freedom to work without any kind of fear of retribution? You know, so what is your opinion on both these matters?
Sorry, my second question was what Shaurya has already asked, so I suspect. I have another question, sir. One, I'd just like to know, while you discharge your duties, what are some of the challenges that you face on a daily basis? Because again, I go back to only what we read in the media. We do read sometimes that the CVC has not given clearance for a particular senior officer to be named as an ED or a chairman of a PSU, but the concerned ministry or the PMO goes ahead in some sense. So therefore, what's some of the challenges? My other question is about the thing that you mentioned about corruption at different levels. So one would call it retail corruption or the wholesale corruption in some sense. we read oftentimes in news that a village revenue clerk or a clerk gets 3 years rigorous imprisonment for accepting a bribe of 500 rupees, and we applaud the justice system. But at some stage you think of it as sort of meaningless. But the other thing that goes unsaid is that people who are supposed to have indulged in higher levels of corruption kind of go scot-free, at least for now. So, as someone who's a custodian of some of these instruments in terms of discharging these things, what's your view? And
Lokpal is now a reality. It has come, and some people feel it is a weak act. Some people feel that it is a very good act. It depends from which position you are looking at it. My own view is that we did not have an act which really dealt with corruption at the highest levels of government, that is to say the prime ministers, ministers, members of parliament. Because the jurisdiction of the CVC extends to all levels of bureaucracy, higher levels of bureaucracy, but the political executive was out of it. So in that sense, it definitely is a step forward because we have created an institutional mechanism which would permit now the corruption at the level of the union ministers, etc., also to be seen in a structured manner. And it is an act which will evolve. We will know how it functions, what kind of people are ultimately made in Lokpal. So it is too early to make this kind of a comment, but I think comments like Jogpal, etc., once the parliament has debated, I think they're totally out of line. That is my personal view. The second point that you had asked me was about the powers of the CVC and the CBI. I'll briefly touch upon it. It is a complicated issue. There are two important principles that are involved. The Supreme Court had entrusted the powers to CVC of superintendence over CBI. Now the question is, one is of course appointment of the director of CBI, getting a case registered against somebody and investigation being carried out. But once the investigation starts, then does the CVC interfere in the manner in which investigation is being carried out or not? Because one basic principle under law globally is that investigation should be done by the investigating officer, the police officer, and there should be no outside influence. So the Supreme Court is debating this issue, and ultimately whatever is the guidance of the Supreme Court, that will become the law of the land. So we are awaiting this, and a bench is hearing this, so there is no issue on that part. The third thing is, you were asking me about the challenges. The first challenge, of course, obviously is that when you hold other people accountable, it is never a very pleasant task. In that sense, to punish people is never this thing, it weighs heavily. But it is somebody has to do this job, and we do it. And when you read about it, these are normal administrative problems. You say something, somebody is not expecting, then you get it sorted out, and you should take it in your stride, because the job that the parliament has conferred upon us is unpleasant by its very nature, and we take it in our stride. So that is not an issue.
I think we are exactly on time, and I'd like to end this session. Yes, we'll take the last question, but we'd like to keep it as brief.
Thanks, Program Director. I have been listening carefully. I will not name institutions and so on and so on. But mainly in terms of corruption itself, let's not zero in corruption as between a state, employees, politicians, and so on, because we need to tackle it comprehensively. One, I agree that you need to institutionalize systems in terms of dealing with corruption. But it needs to be institutionalized even as part of your democratic constitutional dispensation, where it's clearly defined in terms of the Constitution and how should it be followed. So as it then makes sure that even politicians themselves know that they are accountable to the people. Secondly, a mechanism that deals with business-to-business corruption. For instance, collusion of business, either in terms of price fixing and so on and so on. So it's corruption on its own. The people who gets hurt or who gets implicated is ordinary people on the street who normally would no longer afford because there's a collusion in that order. But one last element is essentially the economic system in its own is corruptible. I'm not neither a socialist nor a capitalist, but the manner in which we do business in the main makes mostly that people will necessarily be corruptible. You made references to application of licenses and so on. That's part of the system wherein if ever government in the main does not employ those systems that you can get business without necessarily having to go through a panel of these individuals to get into a country, then therefore you are. The last aspect is on a stratified society will perpetuate corruption. And the question would be, what do I mean? I'm not trying to be classic, to bring classics, but I'm saying if we continue to have, to leave the perpetuation of the rich to the detriment of lifting up the poor, and that's where government needs to intervene in the interest of the poor. If you leave the situation the same, we will not be able to fight corruption because it will perpetuate itself in terms of these stratas. The last thing that I thought maybe needed to be, which young people must start dealing with it, is to have a national civic movement that really operates like a watchdog, that begins to talk about this, talk about corruption from time to time, which necessarily is not necessarily becoming political. Because the moment you become political, you associate yourself with either political, either or. You will be compromised. But you must encourage a national civic movement which must talk to either is this party or that party. Corruption needs to be dealt with. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. These are general observations, but I agree with all of them. Very valuable.
I think we have to close this session. I see a lot of hands there, and I'm sorry I have to, the powers vested in me by whoever is there says that I'm the moderator, so I'm saying I'm going to close this session now. On a lighter note, I think we all love the song from Three Idiots where Amir Khan says, the seeds of corruption is sown by greed. When we tell our children, you do this, I'll get you a cycle, you do that, I'll get you this. So I think on that note, on a very light note, I'm going to end the session. But sir, thank you very much. It's been an interesting morning for us. I have a small task that I request you to perform, which is we have launched 5 new chapters this year, and we'd like to recognize them here on this platform and just like to give a certificate to each one of them. We launched our 28th chapter in Trichy on 3rd May, and I request Leo to come here and collect her. And Siliguri, we launched on 29th, if Ronak is here. We launched the 30th chapter in Solan, so I request Samir to We launched our 31st chapter in Lucknow on 29th November, and I request and our youngest and the furthest chapter in this country, which is Gangtok. A feather in our cap, and please come and thank you very much, sir.